corners of the country. We have successfully negotiated a deal on the promissory note. We now have to stay on the same road and renegotiate other banking debt that was again agreed to by the previous government, and most importantly our personal debt, which is sucking the lifeblood out of our people. I am glad to say that 85% of the heavy lifting is now done. We have also been able to keep our commitment in the programme for government that we would protect two fundamental principles: to protect core social welfare payments, to assist those people and families who have unfortunately lost their jobs through no fault of their own. No increase on income taxes, so that we can reward work and effort, and people can plan knowing that their net pay will not be reduced through tax increases. I believe, and have said on many occasions in this House, that the only way to recover is to create new jobs. In order to achieve that, we have to help existing businesses to grow, and we have to encourage people to set up new business. Fine Gael are committed to this approach, and judging from the reaction to the budget and the finance bill, this is being recognised by business people, and from the feedback that I have received in my constituency of Cork North West. This was very much evident in a recent conference on the Building the Blocks to Success that we held with the Charleville Chamber of Commerce. In Cork, the President of the Chamber of Commerce, John Mullins, while acknowledging the ongoing challenges facing the government, accepted that tough decisions regarding our expenditure were unavoidable. Mr Mullins expressed the views that the overall impact was positive from a job creation point of view, and acknowledged the focus the government has placed in the vital role of the SMEs. The reinforcement of its commitment to the 12.5% cooperation tax and the absence of any increase on employers' PRSI was almost welcome. There was particular welcome also from employers who ultimately are the people who take the risks and create the jobs, that the transfer of sick pay costs to employers did not materialise. Likewise, the business associations across the board welcome the government's efforts to recognise the potential of small businesses. It must be stated that 70% of employment comes from small business. In the budget, we introduced sufficient stimulus measures that will assist employers in maintaining or increasing employment by remaining competitive. I was personally pleased that our representation to the Minister for Finance for the implementation of an essential user rebate for the tax-compliant licensed road haul operator has been accepted. This is the first time the country has ever recognised the haulage industry and the much great work that they do. As we are an island nation and exports are our lifeline, a viable, stable and effective transport sector is absolutely essential. Not only does it benefit our export sector, but it reduces costs to Irish consumers because of our lower costs on transportation. I am also convinced that this will benefit the Exchequer, as our transport companies will now buy their fuel at home and pay Irish excise duties, and I have no doubt that they will also create new jobs. The expansion of this fuel rebate to the coach industry is also most welcome. The initiatives that this government have already taken in the area of tourism have substantially increased jobs in this sector, and the fuel rebate for coach businesses will help provide an added boost. In fact, 6,000 new jobs were created in this sector last year. Every politician, every member of this House would wish that less well-off in our society would not have to share in this pain. Politicians, by their nature, want to announce good news to people. But it was this type of attitude by past governments that got us into so much trouble in the first place. We have to make the right decisions now to protect the future of our economy for both our children and our grandchildren. Again, as I had said, 85% of the heavy lifting is now done, and we can now begin to see a brighter horizon. I commend this bill to the House.
I now call on Deputy Damien English.
To say a few words on this finance bill, which I think is it's another important part of the process of recovery of this country as we get there, bit by bit. I want to address a couple of issues just when I have the few minutes I have. Noteworthy though, I think the Minister yesterday in his opening lines talks about we're now in a position that we can be optimistic as a country. And I think that's a very important point to get out there, because people need to know that this country is recovering and will recover. They need to know there is hope. Because when we're out there meeting people on a daily basis, they're worried, they're concerned, they're trying to manage week to week. But if they know and if they believe that this country is turning around, they'll buy into what we have to do here, they'll accept it, they'll work with us on it, and they'll try and help. But they need to know. And the signs are there to prove that we're not just making this up. This country is turning around. There is hope. And the Minister was right to say last night that we can now bring in a finance bill when during a period of optimism, when things are improving. A couple of recent movements lately show that proof to people. I mean, the record of winning jobs in the last year, the last 2 years, are good. They're not brilliant when you compare to the problem we have of unemployment, but to be in a position that we're now winning more jobs per week than we're losing is the right direction. That's from a position where we lost nearly 280,000 jobs in the previous 3 years before we came into office. So we're in a position of stemming that rot, I would say, that we're back and trying to win more jobs per week. And that's what it's about, winning more jobs than you lose every week, because there's still certain sectors that are going to have more job losses. Construction sector, banking sector, and some of the financial sector, as you adjust and get back to proper levels and percentages of GDP that they should be at. So there's going to be adjustments, but we're on the right track. The recent sale of Irish Life yesterday, but also the raising of money on the markets by our banks and also by ourselves as a country during January. That sets out a positive image of this country, that international investors abroad believe in the future of this country. They would not put the money into this country if they didn't believe this country has a future and has a hope. So people will see that and can see it, and there's factual stuff, and the investment coming in here we're winning it, and we're winning that game, slowly but surely. The recent deal that was announced last week on the promissory note is a very, very important initiative. And I've listened to opposition people saying, oh, there's not a deal at all, the government took over the debt. It was national debt. It was made that by the previous government. None of us like it. On the night of that deal, I spoke here before we knew about it, that none of us like it. We hated it, having Anglo debt and promissory notes around us, but we were stuck with them. And you just couldn't take out the Sinn Féin magic pen and wish them away. It doesn't work that way. You have to negotiate, and you have to work on it and deal on it. And if people around here understand the time value of money and the net present value of money, they will realise that that was a deal, and a very good deal, that would stand the test of time and will prove to this country that it was a win for us. A win. Even in the long term in terms of the actual debt, but even on a cash point of view, trying to run this country for the next couple of years, when money is short and it's very hard to get, from a cash point of view, if nothing else alone, that deal was a win-win for this country, and will free up money money that we can either fund other projects, but also money that we have to find. We don't have to go out this year and find the guts of probably 7 or 8 billion to pay back this year's, last year's, and the interest would have been 8 or 9 billion we would have needed. So it's freeing up the necessity to get that money, apart from the reality that 40-year money, if you apply net present value, it's a win-win. If we stood here a couple of years ago and were strong enough in our deals with Europe, when we needed 60-odd billion to continue paying for the country's services and 60-odd billion to save out the banks, if we went out there and looked for 100 billion long-term money at 40 or 50 years at 1%, everybody would have been very happy. And we would not have been in the pressure the last couple of years we've had in this country, because that's the way you would do it. You'd get money long-term when you've got short-term difficulties that you can't manage to pay back. And so it's a win-win. But I want to go back to the bigger problem we have, because the Minister last night talked about returning stability to the public finances. And I mentioned this before, and I'm going to mention it again. It's only in time that people will realise the real damage the Bertie Ahern era and Fianna Fáil done to this country. And that was in 01 and 08, when they let spend go completely and utterly out of control at nearly every department out there, or in every one of our departments. And if we take a look at the departmental spend trend, and if we analyse it, and I've seen it before, but I'm going to get the information again in PQ, so we'll just put it together for everyone to see what happened during those years. The reckless spend of money. Now, that money wasn't permanent money. It was short-term gain from a housing boom construction. And yet, Bertie Ahern and all his colleagues in Fianna Fáil, including the now newly formed Micheál Martin, they decided to spend that money on long-term initiatives. Gave people lower taxes. Gave people extra services. Gave people extra money in many cases. But what they did really do was give people false hope. Because everybody, to a man and woman, went out there and used their new wages, or their lower taxes, or the better services we had, which were all nice to get, let's not deny it, but they weren't sustainable. But based on that, people went out and invested, or took out mortgages and took out loans and everything, because they were confident they could repay them, because they were given false hope. And what happened? It was built on sand. But people now are faced with a reduction in their disposable income due to wages or services or tax and so on, and yet the debt is still there. And that's the mess I was left with. And we know that it's not a great time to have to bring in either, be it the property charges or reduce overtime allowances. We know it's not the right time, but there is no choice in the matter, because Because at the same time the government was encouraging everybody else to blow the money, they done it themselves and committed the state's finances to an unsustainable manner, which left us with overdrawn some years of 20 billion down to last year, we're 15 billion, and still this year we're between 12 and 13 billion overdrawn. And nobody is going to continue loaning us that money to be overdrawn to spend on services. So we have no choice but to somehow reduce that deficit. And that is done through negotiation and a careful way, and it's a slow and hard and difficult process. Thanks, Chairman. Back to 1 minute. So I think people need to realise the context we're in. And this finance bill is trying to bring in measures that help reduce that deficit gradually over time. At the same time, the 10-point plan for small business to try to encourage job creation and so on. And I welcome that 10-point plan for small business. And a lot of that plan is about freeing up cash for small businesses, because we now have ministers in that department, Minister Ryan Hayes in front of us here, Minister Noonan and Minister Howland, who understand the cash and how important it is for businesses to have cash to be able to conduct their business and to create jobs. Without that, you can't. And so a lot of these initiatives free up that and will help with that. There's the one thing that is not in the finance bill that I would ask that the Minister will give time to look at. Minister Hayes, you're here at the moment. You're aware that your Cabinet colleague, Minister Leo Varadkar, has introduced a pilot voluntary scheme to allow communities to fix or repair their own local roads. Now, no doubt, as you travel around the country, you'll see come across many local roads, especially when you're OPW and you're up and down a lot of back roads. You'll see the problems that people are experiencing, especially in our own county, mainly in the Kells electoral area. Roads are crumbling and falling apart and are being left now in a very dangerous position or situation due to the last 4 or 5 years of less money around to invest in them. These roads do need immediate works, and that's why our colleague. The scheme allows residents, in conjunction with the local authorities, to fix the roads that would not be due for fixing under the Council's 3 or 4 year road plan. So I would urge that maybe as part of this finance bill, that we would consider introducing a VAT exemption or some sort of a rebate scheme or a tax relief that would offset some of the costs that communities would bear in order to make their roads safer and more user-friendly. It's not ideal that our local authorities cannot keep up with the crumbling roads. It's not necessarily their fault, due to systems that were developed over the years and a reduction in the money available due to the situation we are as a country. So it's not their fault, and it's not ideal that the Minister for Transport has to bring in this initiative to encourage locals to spend the money. But if we see that as a short-term solution, it needs to be a whole-of-government approach, and the Department of Finance would have a role to maybe ease that financial pressure, that if you do decide to spend money on your local road to fix it, to make it safer and so on, that there's a bit of tax relief, be it VAT or whatever it is, on that. I think it's the right way to look at it. The same model could then be used to maybe look at other issues. I mean, the student summer work scheme has gone from schools. It just works for here. We could look at it again. I would have spoke about it years ago with Minister Noel Dempsey as a way to get work done in schools, and took it on board and invented the devolved grant scheme, which was only a version of it, but wasn't managed correctly, in my view, either. So a way to encourage locals where they can and have spare cash to put into their own services, but that they get taxed back on that as well. And I believe this finance bill is the vehicle, excuse the pun when we're talking about roads, to help achieve this, and I would ask that it be considered as well. There's many other issues we could talk about. Our reporter committee was discussed by Anthony Lawler in relation to developing an entrepreneurial fund, a youth entrepreneurial fund. That's essential. There's other initiatives like that in that report that we done and launched yesterday is the part-time work initiative, which basically would use people's existing social welfare payments to fund a part-time job for them. The Department of Finance and Public Expenditure could play a leading role in that with the Department of Social Protection, using the same money in a different way to get people closer to a job, to a full-time job. Thanks, Chairperson. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Deputy. I now call on Deputy Michael Culreevy, who has 20 minutes in all, but I see a question mark in relation to the last 5 minutes, but there is a colleague he proposes to share with, but you have 20 minutes as a staff.
Thank you, Chairman. And first of all, can I apologise? I don't have a magic pen. I don't have a magic pen, but what Sinn Féin does have and did have was a different way of approaching a problem. And what our pens did do, what our non-magic pens did do, was write down the policies, the costings, had them verified, and presented that before the Dáil. And government and the Waldorf and Staplers on those benches didn't listen. That's what it's not a question of magic pens. It's a question of approaching this in a different way. Now, so I hope that deals with the magic pens. Now, this finance bill, Chairman, is not all bad. There are some good points in it, some positive aspects. But the problem, I think, is that the positive aspects are drowned in a kind of in the overall intention of the bill and in the tsunami of regressive and deeply damaging provisions in the bill. And I think that the fundamental question is this: should people work for an economy, or should an economy work for people? And I believe that this bill is drafted and crafted on the premise that people must continue to work for and to suffer for the economy. And I think this is wrong, and I think it's very wrong. And this government, in the run into the election, and indeed in the initial days and weeks when it entered power in the spring of 2011, promised so much change, particularly prior to the election. There was so much talk of change, taking a different approach to governance. And I believe that this government has failed to bring about the change that they promised and that was so badly needed. And I believe that this finance bill is further evidence that instead of a different form of government and governance, instead of fresh ideas, what we have is Fianna Fáil under a different name. That's what I believe we have, and I believe it's evidenced in the finance bill. Nothing has changed. Nothing. We continue to take money from the pockets of the very people who should be sustaining our local economy. Now, if you want to talk magic pence, while we take the money from the pockets of the very people who sustain our local economy, we have this hope that somehow, miraculously, this is going to fix our local economy. You want to talk to me about magic? No, that's magic. That expectation, that's magic. It will not, and it cannot fix the local economy. And if we don't fix our local economy, we cannot fix our national economy. And Europe needs to understand that if national economies are not fixed, the European economy will continue to shudder from crisis to crisis to crisis. There is a possibility to do things differently. The government parties promised they would do things differently before the election. Now the government parties seem to think that it's impossible to do things any differently, or hands are tied. Blame the last lot. There is a possibility to do things differently. And politics really shouldn't be about blame. It is important that there's accountability and responsibility when politicians get things wrong. And the last lot, we're accountable and we're put out, and rightly so. Quite right. But politics should be about more than just blaming. It's about offering solutions. It's offering real, credible alternatives to the people. In my opinion, Ireland has a massive amount of potential that this government consistently ignores or pays lip service to. In the long-term strategic development of Ireland as a nation, I believe this government has to use all the resources of the state to improve the lives of the people of the state. And I think all of us would agree with that basic premise. But I think it's time for government to think outside the traditional box here. And it's time to believe that another Ireland is possible. If we look internationally, we will see that there are some governments and some leaders across the globe who are changing their countries for the better. Just last weekend saw the re-election of Rafael Correa in Ecuador. We could do well to study Ecuador. Ecuador went through a period of massive economic turmoil. Minister, you laugh. You laugh. What happened there was that the markets ruled the people. And instead of the markets ruled the people, instead of the people ruling the market. With the arrival of Korea's government in 2007, just 5 years ago, 2007, they took a radically different approach. They showed the people that they didn't have to do the same thing as had always been done, being submissive to the World Bank and to the IMF, paying off external debt, irrespective of the social debts that were still pending. And they called this process a citizens' revolution. And one of the interesting aspects of this citizens' revolution was to use its natural resources to aid and to benefit the people of Ecuador. And instead of leaving multinational oil and gas companies exploit the natural resources of its country, Korea changed the system of oil and gas exploration so that it benefited local communities. Why can't we do this? Why can't the government in Ireland adopt a similar approach to our natural resources? Ireland, we're a country with a wealth of natural resources, and we have not utilised nor exploited these to the best of our ability. Oil and gas, wind and wave energy, all have tremendous potential to benefit this state and its people. However, what we need is a government that's willing to commit to developing these areas and to making them profitable for the state and for the people. There's a common misconception, I would call it, among the public that Ireland needs low oil and gas taxation in order to promote exploration and to develop our oil and gas industries. And successive Irish governments, and particularly the oil lobby, have propagated this myth for many years. The successful oil and gas lobby, with the help of media commentators, have spun, and some of whom have interests, and strong interests, in the oil and gas industry, has spun the myth that Ireland's current system of taxation is the best there is in the exploration of our natural resources. The line which this lobby group spins is that the more oil and gas that is extracted from Irish waters, the more jobs will be created for Ireland and we'll have a better infrastructure. This lobby also claimed that the current system of oil and gas exploration off the Irish coast will ensure energy security for Ireland and the state will not be so reliant on imported fossil fuels. And the oil and gas companies' PR spokespersons and their spokespersons in the media and in politics subtly imply that Irish homes will have access to cheap fuel if our oil and gas companies are allowed to proceed under the current set of rules. But this is wrong. It's untruthful. It's not telling people the facts. Ireland's offshore oil and gas reserves have a long-term potential to be a significant source of revenue for the economy. According to a 2006 report carried out by the Department of Communications, Energy and Natural Resources, there's approximately 10 billion barrels of oil equivalent off our western coast, comprising 6.5 billion barrels of oil and 20 trillion cubic feet of gas. At current oil prices, this equates to a value of approximately 540 billion euro. That's what we have out there. And while it is true that the actual amount of gas and oil brought ashore has been small, those reserves are there. At present, there's very little gas and no oil being extracted from Irish waters. However, this does not reflect the potential that Ireland's reserves holds. Companies that discover oil and gas in Irish territory are not obliged to supply those resources to the Irish market. They can sell it off wherever they want to. And not only that, Our licensing terms are so weighted in the industry's favour, they do not require the companies to bring a single drop of our oil or gas ashore in Ireland. Not a single drop. Ireland's licensing terms do not award the country with fuel security. It can go anywhere. When the government award oil and gas companies with a licence, ownership and control of Irish oil and gas is transferred en bloc to that company. Under the current licensing terms, the government cannot guarantee that the oil and gas will be sold to the Irish market, that it will be landed in Ireland, or that the companies use Irish workers. Irish consumers will continue to pay the full international price for oil and gas found off Ireland's coast, and in a period where the world is nearing peak oil production, it's imperative that Ireland secures its fuel supply. Compared to international standards, Ireland's licensing terms are extremely generous to oil and gas companies. There was a report carried out in 2007 by the US Government Accountability Office, which studied the licensing terms of 142 fiscal systems. And the report found that Ireland has the second lowest government take of all the countries studied. In the United States, there's a minimum government take of 42%. In Norway, the government take amounts to 75%. Our Joint Committee on Communications, Natural Resources and Agriculture published a report in May 2012 entitled, excuse me, Chairman, entitled Offshore Oil and Gas Exploration, in which a number of recommendations were outlined. While the report stated that, and I quote, retrospective changes to fiscal and licensing terms can risk long-term reputational damage, it also said, and I quote again, future agreements can reflect policy changes necessitated by significant changes in the policy context and circumstances. For example, a large increase in the number of commercially viable finds or the size of fields. The report went on to say then, and I quote again, the Joint Committee believes that the overall tax take should, in the case of future licences, be increased to a minimum of 40%. The tax take should increase from the existing levels according to a sliding scale based on the rate of profit, in order to give an overall tax take of 40% for small commercial discoveries, 60% for medium commercial discoveries, and 80% for very large discoveries. Renewable energy also has a massive potential for benefits for this state. According to the Minister for Communications, Energy and Natural Resources, responding to a question that I put to him, only 16% of Irish electricity consumers receive their energy from wind sources. And yet here we are, we have a huge coastline that has the potential to enable us to develop significant volumes of wind energy. The problem is we don't really have a national strategy for renewable energy in this country. We talk about a national strategy as if one were in place, but there is no national strategy for us to use renewable energy to benefit this country, to benefit the people of this country. And what we end up doing is responding to approaches that are made by different companies who are in it for profit. We need to stand back, we need to think outside the box on this one. And we need to be saying, this is what we want from renewable energy that will benefit this country, that will benefit our people, that yes, will improve energy security in Europe, but our primary focus should be a strategy and a way of licensing and a way of working that the primary benefit has to be to those who control the resources, the Irish people. And we're light years away from that sort of a strategy. And we need to get there, and we need to get there very, very fast. We're operating on an ad hoc basis, responding to proposals that are made by people whose only interest in this is to get as much as they can from it and get out with their profits intact. We need to take control. In the past couple of weeks, the government has signed a memorandum of understanding with the British government to supply Britain with a large amount of wind energy. So we'll be piping our natural resources out of the country. Now, I'm not saying this is a bad thing. It may well be a good thing. The problem is, Minister, I don't know what arrangements have been entered into. I don't know how much we're going to get from it. I don't know how much Britain are going to benefit from it. I don't know what the payback is going to be for Irish people. I don't know what impact it's going to have on Ireland's energy security policy. I don't know where that fits as part of a national strategy.
It was European money that built it.
I repeat, I don't know what benefit it's going to be to Irish people or the Irish state. I don't know what benefit exports. We're exporting people. That's not a benefit to the Irish state.
Man, it's energy.
I don't know, and I suspect, Minister, that you don't know. I don't. Well, if you do, can you please let me know how much the Irish people will benefit from the export of energy to Britain? Because up to now I have been unable to get that information. If you can get me that information, if you can quantify the benefit that's going to be made available to the Irish people from this, please do so, in terms of employment, in terms of income to the state.
Doing it.
Yeah. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I'm saying in the absence of a national strategy, it's another ad hoc decision. It might be good, it might be bad. I don't even know what decision-making process was used before that decision was made. Chairman,
the Deputy has a minute and a half.
Is that all?
That's tough.
So, listen, economically we're in a very bad place here. But the whole area of energy, we need to think totally different to the way we're thinking at the minute. I hate that term, outside the box, but I can't think of another way to explain it. We need to take, I suppose, a lateral view at these things. We need to look at it from a different direction. And we need to be asking the questions. What can we do that will increase employment? What can we do that will increase energy security in Ireland? What can we do to maximise the income to the Irish people while giving a fair deal to the companies who are producing it? How do we get the knowledge so that we know we're not being taken for a spin by some of these companies who are now lining up? We need that sort of a national strategy. And we need it very fast. Otherwise, we'll continue to struggle to... I was at a public meeting in Carrick-on-Shannon fairly recently, and a chap in the audience asked a very simple question, and I found it very difficult to answer it. He said to me, how and why have we, as a people and a nation, allowed ourselves to be put in a position where people fear government rather than government listening to and respecting and representing the opinions of the public in this country? That's a simple, but it's a very profound question. And we need to be able to answer that question. Thanks, Chair.
I now call on Deputies Michael McNamara, Regina Doherty and Joe O'Reilly, and I understand they propose to share their time on the basis of 5 minutes, 5 minutes and 10 minutes respectively. Is that agreed? Deputy Michael McNamara.
Chairman, let me begin by commending this bill to the House. I believe it's a good bill for the entirety of the country. I also believe it's a particularly good bill for the Midwest for reasons which I hope to outline. The Minister for Finance published the bill and discussed it in detail last night. He also set out the specific sectors which apply to the aviation sector. Plans for an international aviation services centre were key to the government decision to separate Shannon Airport from the Dublin Airport Authority at the end of 2012. An independent Shannon Airport combined with the landmark of Shannon Development was established, which could conservatively generate between 3,000 and 3,500 new direct jobs over the next 5 years, according to the government-appointed task force, which reported towards the end of last year. That figure of jobs is separate to the construction jobs, which would revolve around growing air traffic at the airport and establishing the aviation sector's centre. The Aviation Business Development Task Force, led by Board Gosh chairperson Rose Hines, was led by Rose Hines, who has since become the chairperson of the airport. The task force concluded that the independent airport combined with the land bank could be successful and sustainable and contribute significantly to the economic development of the Midwest. And I believe that this finance bill is further proof of the government's support for aviation generally in the country, but that support for aviation generally in the country will be of particular benefit for Shannon Airport as it seeks to establish itself as an independent entity. The finance bill provides a provision for an amendment to the definition of industrial buildings, such that industrial buildings allowances will apply to hangars, tear-down pads, parking and ancillary facilities for the period of 5 years from the commencement, and the construction of a new aviation-specific facilities, such as hangars and tear-down pads. Will enjoy an accelerated capital allowance over 10 years. As the Minister for Transport, Leo Varadkar, has said, these measures are designed to attract additional aviation sector businesses and jobs to Ireland and to encourage Irish and overseas businesses already located here to expand their operation. Although these initiatives were initially proposed by the Shannon Aviation Business Development Task Force, they are being made available to all airports in the state. Nevertheless, I do hope that the Shannon Airport will be able to avail of these measures, and I'm confident that they will. I would also like to point to another measure. Obviously, as somebody from East Clare, I grew up spending a considerable amount of time in Limerick City, it being the major city for the Midwest. And I suppose that the increasing dereliction in Limerick City is a source of considerable disappointment to all of us in the Midwest. Indeed, it's been very hard to attract tourists into an area where there's increasing dereliction. Obviously, the combining of the Limerick City Council with Limerick County Council by the government as one of its first acts is beneficial, because the rates base of Limerick City was being undermined effectively by Limerick County Council over decades. That has now stopped. But I'm also very pleased to see an initiative in this finance bill which applies not only to Limerick City but also to Waterford, whereby owners and occupiers, and it's important to point out that it is also occupiers of Georgian buildings, and Limerick is indeed a very beautiful Georgian city. Both the owners and occupiers will be able to avail of tax reliefs to repair buildings. That is something that I greatly welcome. It's not, I suppose, the developer-led type of initiatives which were so favoured by the last government and which contributed so much to the economic ruin that this government inherited, but it is occupier-led, so that people who live in these buildings will be able to avail of it to ensure that these buildings are repaired to their former glory and that they contribute to what is a unique architectural heritage on this island. With that in mind, I would like to again commend the bill to the House and thank you for your time, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. I now call on Deputy Regina Doherty. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to obviously thank you for the opportunity to speak on this today, and I want to acknowledge to the Minister that for me this particular bill has really highlighted the whole listening process, and I'm very grateful for that, and particularly with response to the Pyrite homeowners. It proves that the Minister listened when he provided exemptions for charitable bodies who provide properties for use for recreational purposes. It proved to me he listened and he provided exemptions for the properties were used by incapacitated persons if they've had their houses adapted for mobility reasons. And I have huge respect, and there was a myriad of other exceptions made, and I have huge respect for the Minister for that listening process. However, I do obviously also have huge concerns for the thousands and the thousands of people who previously paid masses of money of stamp duty on their properties within the last 10 years. And it would be remiss of me to particularly represent, or not to represent, the people in my own constituency of Meath East, some of whom paid the highest value of stamp duties because we happen to live in the commuter belt developments. Most of these people have very young families. Most of them are now in massive negative equity. And unfortunately, they were overlooked by the expert group and were subsequently not recognised for the inordinate amounts of stamp duty they paid in the recent past. The poster boy of the tax boom for the last days of the Celtic Tiger was undoubtedly stamp duty. And of course, all taxes rose during the boom, but the rise in stamp duty was completely disproportionate. By 2006, stamp duty had risen by nearly 1,300% from its 1993 level, whilst other tax revenues had only increased by 400%. Stamp duty made up of 3% of total tax revenue in the mid-90s, but it reached almost 8% by 2006. And for a time, Ireland appeared to have achieved the impossible by remaining a low-tax economy, but while spending even greater amounts on public services. But it was all a mirage. A couple who bought a house during the property bubble would have typically paid about 15 grand worth of stamp duty on a £300,000 home, and that home now has probably halved in value. Even the expert group admitted that many people have now ended up with bigger debts than they should have had because they were forced to add the cost of their stamp duty to their mortgages. The Thornhill report argued that by giving a break to those people who paid stamp duty would be giving a boost to some people who have high incomes, and that some of the cost of the stamp duty was absorbed by sellers of the properties during the boom. However, we all know that the majority of people who bought during the boom have stayed put. They've no choice. And they didn't buy the house as a property. It wasn't a speculation. They bought it as their home. There have been huge reductions in household net assets, with an uneven impact of cuts across different households. They have been particularly acutely felt by those experiencing unemployment, by mortgage distress, and there are compelling requirements to deleverage debt. I'd like to have seen the expert group come up with options within the legislation for this huge number of people. The government has opted to charge a higher rate of property tax than the rate considered by the Thornhill expert group. Successive previous governments had become hooked on the notion that using once-off tax receipts, such as stamp duty in the property boom, to put in place programmes that required annual spending in good times and in bad. Don't we owe these people something? I believe that stamp duty from residential property brought about €1 billion into the exchequer during the so-called Tiger years, and it peaked at €1.3 billion in 2006. There has to be some recognition of that in whatever system we arrive at, given the extraordinary, extortionate stamp duty that was paid to the state coffers during those days. This matter is further complicated because buyers of new houses who didn't pay stamp duty, however, did pay very large VAT bills. From 2008, despite broad agreement that then, as the property bubble burst, a property tax was inevitable, political cowardice meant the civil servants in the department were not then asked or tasked with drafting up proposals for its implementation, and no research was undertaken into what kind of property charge would be most equitable. Instead, there was an Irish solution to an Irish problem, namely no solution, but a loud consensus on the cause of the problem. Meanwhile, revenue accruing to the government from the property market via stamp duties, VAT, capital taxes, it plummeted by €8 billion in just 4 years, from €10 billion in 2006 to €2 billion in 2010. Clearly there was a crisis, but instead of taking a brave, bold move to do something about it by introducing the long overdue sustainable revenue raising that was required to fill the void, the last Fianna Fáil government was content on a budget, or to budget on a wing and a prayer, and by slashing spending. The scale of the task, Mr. Chairperson, that's facing this government should not be underestimated. But just because something is hard to do doesn't mean it's not worthwhile, and I would respectfully ask the Minister to reconsider those thousands and thousands of homeowners who did pay vast sums of stamp duty. And I appreciate, we don't have a magic calculator the way Sinn Féin do, but I would respectfully ask you to reconsider and to try and do something for those people in this budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. I now call on Deputy Joe O'Reilly.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. Might I at the outset acknowledge Minister Noonan's very well crafted and progressive finance bill, and acknowledge also, it's the case for it, as we'll go on to explain, and acknowledge also Minister Hayes' very clear exposition of the challenges, the fiscal challenges facing this country, and the necessary solutions within this House and outside. And I think we should be very proud of the bill, and I'm sure Deputy McGrath, when he does get to speak on the record of the House, will be big enough to acknowledge the very progressive elements of the legislation, while offering constructive critique and costed critiques. I would say that the bill attempts to achieve two broad objectives. First of all, it seeks to continue the progress on the public finances, which is so vital from every perspective, ultimately to put our people working. And secondly, it seeks to support and stimulate employment existing and create, of course, new employment. We have a current budget deficit level of 8% of GDP currently. We're heading for 7.5 next year, and we are on course to meet the target of 3% by 2015. That's an extraordinary achievement from a position of effective bankruptcy when we entered government and when the public finances had gone completely awry, with ultimately enormous implications for employment and for inward investment and for borrowing for the country, for stimulus, etc. So the implications of where we were enormous, and similarly the implications of where we're getting to will be equally good, will be equally enormous in the opposite sense. We're on course, as I say, for a 3% by 2015. It's also worthy of note that the banks are back borrowing on the markets, and banking is beginning to normalise. We're on course for growth in 2013, and that's a great achievement. The promissory note deal, while maybe slightly abstract for people to fully comprehend, has enormous implications for the country, in that it will prevent the borrowing of $2 billion per year for the next 10 years. And that has a double effect, in that borrowing would have led to a further reduction in demand in the economy, and a further deflation, if you like, or a further reduction of economic activity domestically, as interest would be paid on it, and as it would result in a diminution of services, etc. That's huge. 3.6 billion won't have to be paid for each of the next 8 years, and that's enormous too, in terms of what that would have meant in terms of services, frontline services, economic activity, and etc. And effectively, the general rate, the average economists are saying now that by the time we do get around in 2038 to paying the debt, it will have effectively diminished by in excess of 40%. So it's effectively it's a huge deal for the country with great implications. We're back on the markets borrowing. The yield on Irish bonds has fallen to 3.6% today from 15% in 2011, and confidence is generally recovering. That's indicated by the new rating from Standard & Poor's. It's indicated in practical, happy terms, which is what we want, by the creation of 12,500 jobs by the private sector last year, and by a continuing quarter-by-quarter increases, 3.6% in the last quarter of last year increase in our exports, which is all very, very positive. Now, the finance bill itself, to turn to it, does a number of very progressive things, which I know, and I did say at the outset, that Deputy McGrath and subsequent speakers will be big enough and are big enough to acknowledge and will know is the right thing to do. There are huge elements. Section 21 dealing with tourism allows for the extension of the Employment and Investment Incentive Scheme until the end of 2020. That allows hotels, guest houses, self-catering accommodation to qualify for a wide range of incentives for investing in their business, repair and maintenance, etc., which cash flow wouldn't be currently allowing and which banks mightn't be that fussy about funding immediately without this kind of support. The 9% special VAT rate is being extended in this area, in the food industry, etc., and it has been a huge stimulus to jobs and will continue to so be. And that's in the tourism section. The tourism industry is vital. It provides 196,000 jobs for the country, 11% of total employment. And it's very important in my area, the Lakeland district of Ireland, the Lake District, if you like, of Ireland, around a very important angling area traditionally and an important tourist area, Cavan, Monaghan, all of that area, and a lot of small guest houses, small hotels who will benefit from this Section 21, and I welcome it. Similarly, in my area, Section 19 is critical in that it deals with the retention of stock relief for young trained farmers, and that's important. It's an incentive for farmers to be properly educated also, and there's financial support for them to do that. And for registered farm partnerships, there's 100% stock relief for young trained farmers, and it's been retained until 2015. And there's 50% stock relief where partnerships extended now to include beef and sheep partnerships. This is very, very important, and for consolidation and for improvement in production levels, etc. Section 46 deals with the restructuring of the capital gains tax. Tax relief will now be made available to farmers where the proceeds of a sale of a farmland are reinvested for restructuring purposes. And this is very important. This relief will also apply to farmland swaps subject to certification by Teagasc, and this will have a huge implication in that will allow consolidation of holdings and more productive holdings and more accessible economies of scale, etc. And having grown up in a rural community myself, I'm acutely aware of the disadvantages farmers suffer from disparate holdings with miles apart, and travel issues and etc. And economies of scale arise in a big, big way there. So this is very progressive and is sustaining farm families and farm jobs. And I personally know many young farmers who are dynamic and enthusiastic about the future of farming in this country. They are willing to embrace new technologies and challenges, revolutionise the way farming is done in this country, and do their bit to extend production over the coming years. The inclusion of these incentives in the finance bill is a very clear message of support to these farmers and to the future of agriculture in this country. And I think we can be very proud of that, and I salute it. And it's a listening minister who did it, as Deputy Doherty stated earlier. I'm very happy this had been brought to me by my local IFA executive on a number of occasions as well, and I'm happy we have good news on that. And while it's not germane to this bill, Cathaoirleach, it's also parallel now by the huge achievements in the CAP negotiations, or in the multi-financial framework negotiations at EU level last week, or a week or 10 days ago, and that the combination of these initiatives in the budget and the recent deal on the Common Agricultural Policy is nothing but enormous news for our farming community, and I'm sure they will acknowledge it as such. The fuel rebate is a wonderful development. It involves partial relief for people who buy auto diesel for business purposes, hauliers. It's now extended to coach operators with great implications for the tourism industry. It's extended to local buses, etc. So it's a good initiative. It will involve partial relief up to a maximum amount of 7.5% per litre. It's something that the haulage sector and the coach operators, etc., had been lobbying for. a listening minister granted it, and I believe it will stimulate the economy. It's all predicated on the principle that jobs are at a premium, employment, retention and creation is critical. With our export sector is very, very important, and the reforming of the 3-year corporation tax relief for start-up companies, increasing the cash receipt basis threshold for VAT, amending the closed company surcharge to improve cash flow for SMEs, and extending foreign earning deductions for work-related travel to certain additional countries is all positive. So I would just say in conclusion, and I appreciate your indulgence, Cathal, just to say in conclusion, we've achieved enormously to date across a range of areas in terms of establishing confidence in terms of job creation domestically and inward investment in terms of foreign lenders' confidence in us. All of those things are achieved, the promissory note deal being the icing on the cake. We've achieved across a range of areas. The challenge now, and this bill is part of it, it's a good part of it, a very important part of it, but we must go on, and there will be a job stimulus package coming. The challenge now is to turn the progress to date into job creation. And that, and I'm finishing, Cathal, in saying this, that will restore the dignity of the people who get the jobs, and on each occasion that there's a job created, 20,000 less will be costed to the exchequer each year. So we have a double whammy there, and with all the health and costs and social expenditure related. So I think this is a good day's work. It's a step in the right direction. I think the House should acknowledge it as such. I think there's an audience outside this House who don't want destructive, negative politics, who want positivity, and who want results for people, and who want, if there's to be criticism, that it be totally constructive, costed with alternative plans. And the days of the magic calculators, I think we have too sophisticated an audience outside for them anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. I now call on Deputies Catherine Murphy, Finian McGrath and Shane Ross, who shared 20 minutes, 6 minutes odd each.
Thank you.
Deputy Catherine Murphy.
Yeah. When I read the finance bill, what I was looking at, what was very obvious in it was that the sign at the Times, there was a lot about loan losses, insolvency, closing off, tax avoidance possibilities, and what I was looking for in it was there something in it that shouldn't be there, but also I was looking for a big vision in the finance bill. And I didn't really see that, I've got to say. We get 2 finance bills, one on budget day, and there's very limited scope to do anything there because it's really shoehorned into a very tight time frame, really the day of budget day itself. So this is the big opportunity, not just to debate the economic management of our country, but also maybe to embrace some opportunities for meaningful discussion about alternative policies. And I hope that that will happen not just over this week, but at committee stage as well. Essentially, there's 2 dimensions to our economy. One is obviously there's tax cuts, there's cuts or the ability to fund public services, but there's also the issue of where we might invest and where we might get that investment. And that investment is critically important if we're going to be able to pay for public services. The silo-based approach to finances, I feel, ignores the cumulative effect on people. For example, things like property tax, child benefit, cost of fuel, third level registration fees, increasing all the time, the exemptions, the reduction of the exemptions on PRSI, many of them hit the same people and are impacting very, very significantly on the ability to exist, if you like, in many cases. And I did ask myself, what kind of a society are we trying to create? And I certainly would like to think that, and I certainly would be in favour of creating a society that's more equal in terms of people's incomes. But I don't see that. It wasn't present in last year's budget, and I don't see it in this year's budget. And things like the €127 exemption, for example, on PRSI was a very big hit for a lot of people. It would be €300 a year for many people that don't even find themselves in the tax net. The provision of increases in stamp duty on health insurance, and I can understand where it's coming from. I'd be a little bit concerned about people trading down to basic plans or maybe dropping out of the scheme and how the service will be funded. Not because I'm a great fan of a two-tier health service, I most definitely am not, but we certainly have pressure on our public health system. And